6G podcast. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 6G, and we cover six topics in about 30 to 40 minutes. And it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Anshul Sag, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Mike Dano from Ookla. And this week, we're coming back a little bit different day of the week, but uh, more stuff happened in that time. So I think I will kick it off just because this is hot news. Um, there's a over the weekend, a lot of rumors have swirled around that OpenAI has a smartphone project, and that they are working with Qualcomm and MediaTek to develop chips for this project. There is no explicit time frame for when this would occur, but smartphone development cycles are about 18 months. So if this starts now, we'll probably see it in 2027. Realistically, even if it started 6 months ago, probably still going to see it in 2027. So this is very clearly, I think, a next year project. I also think this may have been born out of OpenAI deciding that doing everything themselves is maybe not the greatest idea, um, and that some of their wearable AI product ideas that they supposedly killed might not be as viable as a smartphone project. Also, there's a lot of smartphone manufacturers out there who will build one for them, and there's already a mature ecosystem for all these things in place. So, um, also on top of all that, I believe that a smartphone would be a lot more impactful than like an AI wearable, because AI wearables are a new market, and new markets tend to grow slowly until they hit their hockey stick. But a smartphone, there's a lot of disaffected users, and there's a lot of people who want something new and interesting. So I do think the smartphone market is ripe for intervention, disruption, whatever you want to call it. And all of these agentic AI companies, we'll just say AI companies, agentic or not, a lot of them want to get into the market, but they don't really have full control of the operating system and the phone experience. So they're kind of limited by Android, and they're not going to get iOS. And I've heard a lot of people in the background tell me that they can't really do what they want to do with AI because they're limited by the operating system, and Google basically sets the terms for how things can work. And it seems like if OpenAI were to do this, they would have full control of the operating system, and it wouldn't be dependent on an app ecosystem like Android would be. So it'd be very interesting. It'd be very different. Um, I think it's possible. I think it's way more possible than Elon doing a phone. Um, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea, and I think it's more commercially viable than a lot of other ideas I've heard so far. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'm actually very interested in this because it's true, like, we haven't seen a lot of really dramatic moves in the smartphone market in a while. So I think, disruption and upheaval is a welcome development, in a market. You just don't want to see it get too stale, right? So an entry by OpenAI into smartphones would be, I think, a welcome development. Whether it's successful or not, I think, is another question. Yeah, but I would say I think it would be a welcome development, partly because I have found Siri, and I have upgraded to the one of the newer iPhones, and I still find Siri to be profoundly stupid when compared
Yes.
to some of the other options that are out there now. I think the question for you though is, are they going to do what operating system? They're not going to. You don't think they'll use Android? They'll use something else?
Most likely it'll be something like an AOSP build where it's like still compatible with a lot
Hmm.
of, because the thing is, even if you're not using Google's version of Android and you're using an AOSP build or something like that, it could be Linux also, but just like the development environment's already mature for that. Um, it would definitely be something Linux based, but um, the other thing is just like I was thinking about it, like smartphones aren't going away, right? So like even if OpenAI builds their own device, it's still gonna be attached to your phone. So there's going to be a phone dependency whether they like it or not, because they're not going to be able to build connectivity both for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cellular, and then also deal with all the compute that they need. That they're going to have to borrow that from the phone. So I think maybe they're just like taking a step back and going, hey, maybe we should like look at the phone more. It's not as sexy as building an AI wearable, but I also think that they could build their wearables on top of a phone and have a better experience, because then they would have a lot more of a seamless connectivity, AI, all these things would be way more controlled if they had a phone. And if you use, let's say, Apple devices or Samsung devices together, it's a better experience, right? Like
Yep.
you can get, I have Galaxy Buds 4. I can use the same buds on my PC and on my phone. Same with an Apple, right? And like the ability to have one pair of earbuds that automatically switch between devices, that's already a better wearable experience. So I imagine with AI, it'd be the same thing. It's like the conversations you have on your wearable are also available and contextually there for your phone and for your PC. Now, they could do that via the app, right? But then how much of the seamless connectivity and the ability to share ideas and thoughts and presence, how much of Android is going to enable that? That's the question. And I think the reality is that they want to take a go at this. And I don't think it's as expensive as people think, especially with the smartphone market where it is today, pretty stale. I think there's a lot of people who would be interested to help them. And that's why I think Qualcomm and MediaTek are rumored to be helping them build chips for this.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah, very interesting, Rao, to see how this is going to develop, and I think we're getting ready for, so if that does happen, I think it would be a welcome development. And we also look like we're going to get additional competition in smartphones. I hear the new rumor is that the foldable iPhone is coming this fall, and so
yep.
between an OpenAI iPhone, a foldable iPhone, and competition in the wearable space, I think that's definitely interesting. Yeah, worth watching. Yeah. So to pivot, I picked out a topic very different from OpenAI phones, but certainly no less sort of impactful. Is the was it the first quarter earnings season is fully upon us. We've had most of the big telecom companies reporting their earnings, and so I wanted to flag that. But mainly, I think the real surprise to everyone was the Charter results. Certainly, they were a surprise to Charter investors. Charter, which operates the Spectrum brand of internet service, and after its acquisition of Cox, it's positioned to be the biggest cable company in the U.S. And boy, they got punished after their earnings report. Their shares fell almost 25% last week after they reported earnings. And according to the financial analysts at New Street, they lost about $8 billion in equity value after that report.
Ouch.
Yeah, so it's just a huge stock fall, just a real surprise. And the New Street analysts are calling it Bloody Friday, which it has a certain ring to it. And so, it's kind of like, what does that mean? I mean, they certainly did report some surprises. They lost more than 100,000 cable internet customers, far above expectations on the mobile side of things. So, obviously, Charter operates the Spectrum Mobile MVNO. It works on Verizon's network, but it is from Charter, the cable company, and there too, they reported the addition of fewer mobile lines than expected. It was about 360,000 mobile lines versus the expectations of more than 400. I mean, still a lot of gains there, but less than was expected. So, but it's really kind of hard to understand exactly why the sell-off happened. I think there's a lot of things going on in the cable industry right now, and certainly it seems like Charter is kind of in this nexus of investor ire at the moment, which is always a little hard to discern exactly why stock prices do what they do. But certainly this quarter, it seems like Charter is the one that is generating all the attention. And so I'll just note very briefly two things sort of related to this. Is that the first one is Peter Supino at Wolfe Research is one of those financial investors out there, and he wrote, after this big sell-off in Charter stock, he wrote, is it time for T-Mobile or Verizon to make an acquisition attempt on Charter? That was the take from Peter Supino. Obviously, I have no insight here as to whether or not they're going to do that or not. According to Peter Supino, his argument is that this current administration is certainly the time to try. That that it seems like the timing is right for that kind of situation for an acquisition attempt. But it obviously remains to be seen. There's no telling what will happen. But when there's this much sort of stock price movement, usually is when these kinds of mergers and acquisitions go down. But the last thing I'll say here too is that that's not the only big financial transaction that may happen in the U.S. telecom industry. Another one that we may see soon, and actually has some rumors around it. So we got some published reports that Deutsche Telekom is considering a full acquisition of T-Mobile. So Deutsche Telekom, based in Germany, owns a 53% stake in T-Mobile, but the rumor this time around is that they may increase that stake to a full ownership share instead of just a 53% stake. So that transaction has not happened yet either. That is just a rumored one. But it's another indication that already we've seen some major transactions in the telecom space. We've seen AT&T acquire Lumen's fiber business. We've seen Verizon acquire Frontier, right? And so it seems like there may be more. We've seen obviously Charter acquire Cox, so there may be more in the offing. And I think this sell-off is maybe an indication that maybe closer than further away, those additional transactions. But we'll see.
Yeah, I forgot about the Charter Cox acquisition because that gives them effectively a monopoly in San Diego. I mean, they already have their local monopolies, but it would just be one company providing cable here. I think the rumor or idea of T-Mobile acquiring Charter seems like a terrible idea, because they would just be taking customers from themselves, right? Because I guarantee you, out of those 100,000 customers they lost, a good chunk of them went to Verizon and T-Mobile, right? So that seems like not a winning proposition unless they can deploy fiber, or make the investment to deploy fiber through the entire Charter footprint. That would be insanely meaningful, right? If they could, because the truth is most of these cable operators, they're running fiber to the node, and it's just copper from the node to the house, which is a very short run. It's an expensive run, but they already have fiber in most of the network. So it's like they've never made that hop, right? Like at least Comcast in some areas is making that hop, right? They're adding fiber to some of these nodes that used to be copper, and most people I've talked to are pretty happy with that opportunity. I just think the future of air quotes cable is fiber, and AT&T knows it, Verizon knows it. Comcast is getting with the program, and I think Charter's kind of the last bastion of copper, and they're paying for it. Like people, people pay more for cable and get less. So I think that's really the fundamental problem that these cable companies have, is they are providing an inferior product for a higher price, and the only reason why they get away with it is the lack of competition. But hey, T-Mobile and Verizon offer a relatively competitive product for a lower price, and I just think that we're in a place where they're paying for it now, and I think that's why that stock price had dipped so far, is just because it's kind of a validation of a lot of people's thesis that this whole thing is going to bite them, and it looks like it is now. That theory is becoming practice.
Yeah. And so then the question becomes, well, what happens next? If they've been punished to this degree, who might make a move on them? And I think that's the interesting question. Obviously, neither one of us, I think, have any insight as to, boardroom negotiations, but the parlor game of who's going to make a bid for who is one that is
And,
it's hard not
hey,
to play out the the possibilities here.
it's also possible that a unified Deutsche Telekom T-Mobile could make a play because it was a much bigger
Exactly.
entity,
Right. Right.
and
Right. Right.
they would have a lot less roadblocks to block them internally, right?
Right.
So, um, I, I'm not a big fan of the idea, but a unified T-Mobile, one T-Mobile globally, that would be a very interesting company. I mean, T-Mobile and Deutsche Telekom already partner so much on a lot of stuff,
Right.
um, and like I've been very close to T-Mobile for quite some time, and their whole makeup has moved to a lot of ex Deutsche Telekom people. So, I don't think that's an accident. Um, and yeah, I think the whole T-Mobile thing is like almost like a formality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that what would that if Deutsche Telekom were to make a move for the remainder of T-Mobile, what would that mean, right? Well, how would that position T-Mobile in the U.S. market globally? Yeah, I think it'll take some time for all of this to play out, but certainly it does seem like the board game is set for these kinds of big for some additional big moves. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes down.
Speaking of big moves,
Yes,
my
here
my
we
second
go.
topic,
All
my
right.
topic is a combination of Intel and Tesla's earnings, which don't sound very 6G, but a lot of what Intel is doing is going to drive 6G, whether it's their networking business or their ability to empower AI. They announced earnings which were above and beyond everybody's expectations, and also they projected higher earnings as well for their future quarters. So their stock went through the roof. They are now an $83 stock, um, up from $18 a year ago. So that's crazy. Obviously, the U.S. government investment was important. So was the NVIDIA partnership. But I think what really put it into the stratosphere was their agreement with Tesla to do Terafab, which gave it a lot more credibility on both sides. But then in Tesla's earnings, they explicitly named Intel's 14A process node as their chip fab uh, process. So this is going to be an Intel Foundry 14A process in Terafab, which is a big deal because that's a lot more concrete in terms of time frame. Um, that gives it a lot more credibility because it's like, okay, we're not going to invent something new. We're going to take something that's already in development. It's going to be, very advanced node. They might actually 14A may actually beat TSMC to the 1.4 nanometer process. So 16A or 18A is what's currently out there. 18AP will be the next mid node between 14A and 18A. And 14A will be kind of the culmination of a lot of what Intel has tried to accomplish over the last 5 or 6 years, turning around the company. And you're starting to see this turnaround starting to materialize. And that's also why I think investors got very excited because it's just like this is the beginning of the turnaround in a lot of ways. Everything seems to be doing really well, both client and data center and AI components. And I'm very privy to what's going on at Intel. I'm very close to them as well. And it's just the beginning. There's so many more things that are kind of in flight, that there's a lot more momentum. And obviously a lot of investors are also in tune with that. So I think there's a lot more confidence in what they're doing. And the internal sentiment is also very positive now. So like people just like they want to get going. And I think the CEO has also kind of instituted a lot more of a go fast, move, no rest for anybody kind of attitude, which can be exhausting. But I think it's much more exciting than a company that's laying people off constantly. Um, and yeah, I just think that like Terafab 14A kind of is a perfect culmination of what the U.S. government was trying to achieve with the CHIPS Act, which is U.S. manufactured chips for U.S. manufacturers producing products in the U.S. Right,
Yeah.
and that's the dream. And I think that's part of the reason why people are also excited because they want to support that idea. Elon understands the political implications of that. So does Intel. So them partnering together is kind of like a no-brainer, which is why I thought the Terafab announcement a few weeks ago was a good idea. And now we've got more concrete details. Intel, it's not really Intel Foundry's place to say what customers are doing what, but it's up to the customer to make those announcements. And if they do, then Intel can talk about it. So I was not privy to 14A and Tesla slash SpaceX with Terafab. But now that it's public, it makes total sense. And it fits exactly what Intel Foundry's been trying to push for their value prop. And they may actually give Tesla a leg up on process node because 14A may give them an incredible power and area efficiency that no one could deliver at the time when they launch it, which is going to be in the 2027, 2028 timeframe. And yeah, obviously nothing's going to really materialize this year, but they're going to need to put a lot of orders in for equipment. And realistically, 2028 is probably a very optimistic timeline. Intel itself may still bring up 14A before Terafab does, but that might be a good thing because then they could be transferring those learnings directly to the Terafab so that they have less challenges with production.
Right. Yeah. No, it's been great to see essentially an Intel comeback story, right? I mean, that's a company that has a long and storied history in the U.S. market and globally, and it's just such a heavy player, heavy hitter for so many years, and to watch it really struggle for a while, but now seem to be on the upswing. It's kind of a relief, for those of us who are sort of cheering domestic manufacturing and sort of a stable supply base for U.S. companies. That is definitely a good outcome, or at least the trajectory seems to be pretty good. And it is, and there is a somewhat of a 6G angle here in that Intel is a major supplier to the mobile equipment companies like Nokia and Ericsson. Intel
Yep.
Silicon powers a lot of those base station products. And so, to have a healthy silicon supplier in Intel headed into 6G is definitely not a bad thing. And, the idea that NVIDIA is coming into the 6G equipment market in a big bad way, having some competition from a rejuvenated Intel is definitely, I think, probably a relief for a lot of the companies like Ericsson and Nokia that want to make sure that they have a diverse set of healthy suppliers that they can, essentially pit against each other. But yeah, a good, a nice turnaround story to watch. And the deal, I think the deal with Tesla, SpaceX, that's the one I think is really interesting to watch. I'm not sure exactly where that's headed. But that's the one that I think I have the most interest in. Just Elon Incorporated is just a wild thing to watch, play out.
Agreed.
Yeah. Good. So go to my next one here. So my next, I was just checking the list, and this is a easy one for me to talk about because I spent so much time working on it. So the second topic that I wanted to talk about for today's episode is I published a big report on direct-to-device D2D. And I'll tell you that, so as I'm sure direct-to-device is the new interesting topic in the cellular industry. It's it's literally smartphones connecting to satellites, and so it's this big new technology that is just now hitting the commercial scene. And so the iPhone can text to Globalstar satellites, and now Starlink has a satellite constellation that can also do these kinds of very slow speed, low light data connections that support text messaging and some other features. But in the Ookla research group, we had a look at this emerging technology and found out that, I think that one of the big takeaways for me was just the percent of unique users that we see each month. And in general, it's about 0.5% to about 1% of unique users per month make use of these kinds of D2D satellite connections. So about 0.5% in the US, ranges up to about 1% in Chile, goes much lower in places like Japan. We counted about 10 different countries around the world where we're counting these kinds of connections. And it's just, it's just a really interesting technology. It's really kind of exciting to be on the forefront of some of these, real early developments. And these are still early days in this industry. So we're kind of setting a benchmark here, but certainly as the technology develops and the marketplace expands, pricing models evolve, I think that we're going to see that all these benchmarks changing over the next months and years. But that D2D report published early last week. It's on the Ookla research website. So if you're listening, go ahead and Google it and check it out. But yeah, and the last thing I'll say about that is that it actually took a huge amount of work inside of the Ookla research department. There's so many people who helped me with this article, and it just took a lot of work from a lot of people. So I have to say a big thank you to everyone that inside of Ookla that helped put that together, because it was a major it was a major project, and frankly I have to say I'm kind of glad it's done, because that was a lot of work to put that thing out. So, but it worked out well. It turned out well. A lot of interesting data points in that. So happy that's published.
It's very interesting data. I saw this report. I forgot that you wrote this, and I was going to make it one of my topics. And then I was like, wait,
Yeah,
it's probably one of his topics. And then I
that's probably
realized,
probably gonna pick that one. Yeah.
yeah. The one thing I noticed, that my analytical brain immediately pulled from this data, looking at the percentages based on country, it's almost like the percentage is inversely proportional to the population density of the country.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the less like Australia, super low population density, high use of satellite, probably because satellite, terrestrial coverage is not good, right? So I think, you know, this kind of validates a lot of our assumptions in that there is a fairly low percentage of users who will utilize the service. Um, and it works really great in countries that are very large and vast. Um, you know, if D2D was a thing in Russia, it would probably be a very big thing. Um, but I noticed the whole thing about Ukraine and some of the sensitivities around that. So, you know, um, let's just say Russia doesn't get access to that technology as far as many countries are concerned. Um, but yeah, I just think that like we're in a place where I think this technology has proven itself, but there's still lots of room for improvement, and um, there will very likely be places that will benefit from it greatly. Like I imagine there's probably parts of Brazil that are like never going to get internet coverage, and D2D will be like massive. Plus, like, the whole ecological perspective, you don't need to build cell towers, right? You don't need to destroy the ecology to get coverage. So I love the idea of like preserving um, the ecology while still being able to provide internet services where it's needed. I think that's a very happy balance. Like, I live in parts of Southern California where they still don't have cell coverage because the people who live there don't want there to be.
Right.
So they don't want cell towers, or they don't want people coming, like whatever the reasons are. Like there are places that just aren't going to get coverage. So um, it's nice that this is a thing and people can take advantage of it. But yeah, it really felt like population density is the inversely proportional to utilization of the technology, which makes logical sense.
Right. It makes a lot of sense. And actually, my colleague Luke Kehoe published some newer data that's sort of based on this, but specific to the UK market, which just launched. And he's our European analyst, and so he looked at that, and that's exactly what he found, was that coverage in the UK is actually quite good, and so we can actually track the percent of scans in each country, and so the percent of scans is actually quite low in the UK, indicating that most the number of times that you need that D2D connection is fewer, because the coverage there is so good. There's just less land mass, less uncovered land mass in the UK versus a place like the US, which I live in the Rocky Mountains. Lots of places that are uncovered in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, I also wanted to say I saw one of your other articles on Ookla from one of your colleagues around the Hajj, which I thought was
Mm-hmm.
kind of cool
Yeah.
because like that's like one of the craziest gatherings of people in the world,
Right.
um, and like probably one of the most challenging like network infrastructure challenges in the world.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it's very much a Wi-Fi approach, um, and yeah, just like I never really thought about that as a like problem, but like it makes total sense that all these different hotels and different venues um, would be overloaded with people, just jam packed, probably trying to call family and see how everybody's doing. And yeah, it's just so fascinating because I never really thought about that one as being like, we always talk about the Super Bowl and we talk about the World Series and we talk about the World Cup, but like Hodge happens every year,
Yeah.
and uh, it's a pretty crazy one.
Yeah. These major network of, I imagine the RF engineers, it's got to be somebody's job to like plan for that all year, basically. Like that's, as soon as it's over, it's like, okay, what are you going to do next year? How are you going to improve this experience for next year? Now, start your 12-month planning, for keeping those people connected. And so it's just it's a neat industry to think about, all the different levers that people are pulling all over the world
Yeah,
to make this stuff happen.
and it's also interesting. Like obviously these are the hotels, but like how about like the city of Mecca or the city of Medina? Like how are they planning for it too? So yeah, it's really interesting. And Saudi Arabia in general is kind of a more forward thinking country in the Middle East in general in terms of how they deploy infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah. Very, very big regional differences. It's true, in terms of equipment, infrastructure, spectrum allotment. I mean, it really is just it's all essentially the same characteristics and functions, but much different localized deployments, and you can really see that in the data. Very interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I guess we'll move on to my third and final topic, and it's another earnings story. This one's Verizon's. For Q1, they posted 55,000 postpaid net adds, which is the first time they've had a positive Q1 growth since 2013, which is painful. Um, and I think, you got to hand it to them. Some of it might actually be the new CEO.
Yeah.
I would say it might be a little too early to give him credit. There might be some Hans credibility there. Much like the Intel story, like most of it's Pat Gelsinger, and some of it's Liputan. Um, it, Something's happening. I would also say they did have very aggressive plans in the last few months, including Q1, where they were like one of my friends, Avi Greengart. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
posted about their Verizon. He like found out that like they had some absurdly low pricing and very aggressive device like agreement plans. So that's something very interesting and makes sense that they would be able to get net ads from that. Um, but also like their CEO was talking about how they are moving towards being AI native, um, but also that they don't believe that the best network is the only way to solve the customer problem. I would say that they were a little bit in Delulu land if they thought they had the best network at all during this 5G era. Um, I would say they definitely had the best 4G network, but that was years ago now. Um, and I think it's also a recognition of paying attention to customers, and not really treating customers like they have in the past. I think that they very much want to reclaim leadership, as they've said, um, but I think it's important for them to understand that they need to be different. And I think they leaned a little too hard on being the best network for so long that when they were no longer the best network, they didn't know what to do. And reclaiming the best network is a very difficult thing to do once you've lost it, because tech debt, packed it kind of stacks up, and they definitely had a lot of tech debt, and it was mostly spectrum focused. But to your point last week, they might have a chance with millimeter wave. That might be something they can take advantage of in the future. But right now, they still have to focus on like still winning back customers, and being able to um, kind of rebuild trust in ways that will manifest in profits and net ads. I'm still a Verizon customer. I run multiple networks. I actually have one device on each network, including Google Fi. Um, so I'm always assessing the quality of networks and the state of things. And I will say that like Verizon very much lagged behind T-Mobile, but they also made up a lot of time and space. But their coverage still isn't where T-Mobile's is. Where if we're comparing mid-band networks, I'm not even talking about speeds, coverage, just coverage of their networks. I still get Verizon 4G way more often than I lose T-Mobile UC. So I think there's a lot of uh, room for improvement. And this guy's not really been in his role for very long. So it'll be interesting to see what the full turnaround looks like. But I think it's going to be a multi-year strategy. But this is a very positive, um, you know, move in the right direction for them. And it looks like they're looking to also save money. They're saved $200 million on energy. Um, the 85 of their network problems are now resolved autonomously before customers even notice them. And their AI tools will have improved customer satisfaction scores by 1,280 basis points year over year. So they're making real improvements with AI that are, I think, helping them to post these kinds of earnings. And I expect that we'll see, that momentum grow over the next few quarters.
Yeah, it's been there's another story, right? That Verizon has struggled for years in terms of gaining new mobile customers. And so to see the new CEO come in, and I mean, that must have just been his laser focus, is like, let's return to smartphone customer growth. And so that's what we saw in their Q1 numbers. And yeah, they beat postpaid phone net add estimates with 55,000. I think the interesting part that I was taking away from that is, obviously the Dan plan is in action at Verizon. Their new CEO is putting his footprint on that company. So that's interesting to watch. The one thing I thought was interesting in their earnings report was that they reported fixed wireless net adds of just over 200,000, which was substantially below estimates. And so, that's not a huge part of their business, but I think those of us in the network community watch fixed wireless very carefully because that's such a huge pull on network resources and has been a pretty interesting competitive factor to watch, in the US market. There's almost, I think it's 15 or 16 million fixed wireless customers all over the US now, which is, a pretty substantial number from just having that technology launched just a few years ago. So watching fixed wireless is interesting, but yeah, you're right. The main story here is that Verizon has returned to customer growth in the first quarter, which is the widely regarded the most difficult quarter for net adds. And here comes Verizon roaring in with a real big win. So yeah, we'll see how the rest of that plays out for the rest of this year, right? Like what levers are they going to pull in order to continue that growth and momentum? I think that remains to be seen, but certainly they're one to watch.
Well, I would say one of the cool things that they did was the whole FIFA partnership and giving away tickets to their customers, which I totally signed up for. Um, but that's like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, Verizon's associated with the World Cup. Now, whether or not the World Cup will be a success, God knows. It's going to be a nightmare, I think. But I think FWA is a big thing. I also think FWA, in my mind, is a function of coverage and capacity. And if you don't have both, then you will struggle to add more FWA customers. And I think Verizon is not really in a position to really push FWA as hard as maybe they did initially, because I don't know if they have that much more coverage or that much more capacity to add. I think we will see FWA continue to grow as the network becomes more advanced. I think, with slicing, with almost everybody doing slicing for FWA now, I think that's going to be important to maintain the customer experience, and also to limit how much of the network gets utilized for that, to your point. Um, but I think that T-Mobile still has the biggest opportunity because of their coverage, and I think rural areas are really ripe for disruption still. Like I still think there's a lot of opportunity for growth there.
Yeah. You just landed on the perfect transition to my last topic about talking about rural areas. I wanted to return to Socorro, New Mexico's data center and talk a little bit about that. That's my third bullet point to talk about this week. So you mentioned rural areas. Socorro, New Mexico is definitely one of those rural areas. So as you probably well remember, I think last episode we talked about a giant AI data center has been proposed to be built in Socorro, New Mexico. Socorro is about an hour south of Albuquerque. There's about 8,000 people who live there. That's my hometown. That's where I grew up. Very familiar with it. My mom still lives there. Still have family members who live there. And so this is a very the business implications of a data center in Socorro, New Mexico, not that big. For me, it's, I think, very interesting to watch the AI wave crash up against the city that I grew up in, which is it's a very small city, has a super small town vibe. You can walk across the city in maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It's a real tiny town. It's got a college there, and it has a Walmart, a few other things, but it's a real tiny town. And so so anyway, I've been following. So I talked to my mom about the data center to hear what she had to say about it. Talked to some other folks there just to get the vibe. And it's the talk of the town.
Of course.
This new data center is absolutely the talk of the town in Socorro, New Mexico, and so it's very interesting to watch from afar, because so the Defensor Chieftain is the city newspaper. It's been operating for 150 years. They had a full page spread on the data center, talked all about the developer who brought in this data center and some of the opposition to the data center among people in Socorro. So according to the Defensor Chieftain's excellent reporting on this topic, I highly recommend you Google this and read some of the local reports coming out of here. But one report is that the CEO of the company who has proposed this data center tried a similar strategy in southern Illinois in a tiny little town called Murfreesboro, and he tried to build a big solar grid there, and it did not work out. And so the newspaper has some quotes from Murfreesboro's mayor about how that the solar panel never did come to fruition. And apparently this person who's backing the data center in Socorro was the architect there, sort of in 2017 timeframe. And then some other good articles on the Defensor Chieftain is that there's a newly formed group of concerned citizens under the name Inform Socorro is now advocating against the construction of this data center for a variety of reasons. They have a variety of concerns about this data center. I think it's interesting. So I looked into it a little bit more. I mean, they want to build a giant solar farm there in Socorro, obviously. The other thing they talked about is the water needs. So actually, apparently you can build a data center and have a completely closed system for the water, which I think is interesting. It did not mention a closed water system for this particular data center. They talked about securing some of the water that they need from the atmosphere, which is not a technology I'm familiar with. And so
you can do it. It just requires a lot of energy. It's you're capturing air and just kind of distilling it into water, but it's energy intensive. But if you're using solar, you basically already have free energy.
Socorro is very dry, and it's hard to imagine a system that would, be able to get enough water out of it.
It's more used in more tropical climates.
That would make sense to me. But anyway, I mean, so my plan is, I think watching this data center in Socorro has been very interesting. I feel like it's reflective of a wider conversation in the country about what does AI mean for the culture? What do AI data centers mean for cities like Socorro? And so watching this play out in Socorro, New Mexico, I think is sort of representative of what may be happening in other parts of the country, and just sort of general attitudes toward AI services and data centers in general. So over the weeks, as developments happen in Socorro, I'll be your Socorro correspondent, bringing you occasional updates from Socorro, New Mexico. It'll be a lot like Garrison Keillor's. What did he do? The news from Lake Wobegon. I'll be doing the same thing. News from Socorro, New Mexico about the data center. So stay tuned.
I think there's a very interesting discussion being had online amongst people who, I feel like it's again become a political issue where it's like people who lean left are anti-data center and people who lean right are pro-data center. I'm somewhere in between, as a lot of us are. I think the important thing is a lot of people don't realize how many data centers are already in place.
Exactly. Yes.
And they don't realize that like a lot of data centers exist completely just kind of melded into the infrastructure of the country. I used to when I had my own website, we hosted our own servers in a co-location. But also we had some VPSs, and we had all kinds of infrastructure in place to make our website run fast and serve content quickly. So I got to see One Wilshire, which is basically a skyscraper data center that most people don't even notice because it looks like a regular building. A lot of these data centers for AI are being built like warehouses, but data centers are very different, for AI they will be too. I just think that these really big multi-gigawatt capacity, deployments are really what people are worried about. But then they're also making a big deal about really small ones that are just like any other data center. So I think it's important for people to be educated about what the costs are. I've heard things about some people are getting sick from the sound of data centers being nearby. And that data centers are taking up all the water, and it's like, to your point, some data centers can be water neutral or even water positive depending on where they're deployed. And some data centers are being cooled entirely by cold seawater. So
Right.
it really depends, I think, and it's important for people to assess on a case by case basis. And it's okay to be critical. I don't think maybe we're going to build some data centers that get no usage. um, but I just think that it should be a case by case basis. And I would love to know why the Socorro data center needs to be built. I always ask that question. It's like, well, who's the customer,
Yeah.
and why do we need this? Because developers like to build,
Yeah.
and sometimes if you build it, they won't come, and nobody wants to have something fallow.
Yeah.
So it's better to use resources somewhere else if they're actually going to utilize
And
it.
it is, yeah, it's a nice example of using, learning about a new technology, understanding exactly how it works. I mean, I think there's plenty of just endless supply of historical examples of, you know, uh, 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 nuclear radiation poisoning residents, and stuff leaking into the drinking water, and the water in Flint, Michigan. I mean, there's plenty of examples of local developments that have gone wrong, but there's also plenty of examples of local developments that have gone right. So I think it is up to each of us to educate ourselves onto how that all works, and what the actual impact would be. And you're right. I think the usage question is the one that I'm particularly interested in. Is there a lot of demand for a data center in Socorro, New Mexico? I think that's the open question. That's the one that I'm interested in. But certainly there's a lot of issues around here, and then we haven't even gotten into what does AI mean for society and culture and our the future of our work in general. That might be a question for a different podcast. But yeah, it's this interesting example of news out of Socorro. It's interesting for me to follow.
Great. Well, we'll keep up on it. We expect you to keep you
Yes.
posting more stuff.
Yeah. I'll stay on top of it.
Thank you. All right, so I think our we're wrapping things up today. So we hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. And if anyone would like to provide insights on a future 5G or 6G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Dan is at Mike is at Mike D Dano.
That's me.
I don't know what that's about. You're not Dan. And I'm
Close enough.
Anshul Sog at Anshul Sog everywhere else. And we hope you have a great rest of your week. And please tune again next time. And don't forget to rate us and subscribe.